All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started here this morning. Good morning to you all. It's good to see you, and I'm grateful to be able to be here again with you this morning. We've only got 2 more weeks left here in this study after today, and Pastor Jerry is up the next 2 weeks, right? Yes, right. And we'll go ahead and get started here. Let's pray. Father, we do thank you for today and for these men, for their desire to know you, to pursue you, to honor you in every way. And I pray that that would be the desire of all of our hearts, that we would seek not. And I think that's very helpful to defining the nature of a discipleship relationship, and hopefully that was instructive for you men to kind of get your arms wrapped around. I do just want to make one clarifying comment, because I fear that maybe taken out of context, I overstated my case a little bit last week as I was walking discipleship. That's certainly discipleship. That certainly can be a part of it, but that's not the extent of it. No, the extent of true discipleship wraps its arms around everything within your life, lifestyle, and the relationship that God has granted to you. You are responsible for discipleship in every relationship and really in every interaction in every relationship. And that's what our definition of discipleship is intended to be. So I want to bring some clarity to that to make sure I didn't overstate my case and cause some confusion in the process last week. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear here this morning. Okay. Before we jump in here to some more of the practical nuts and bolts of this today, I do just want to stop very briefly and see if any of you have any questions about what we've been talking about or about reading here over the past week or two. Anybody have anything that you're wondering about or needing some clarity on at all? Don't say I didn't ask. Yeah, Don.
Is there anything that shows the link between the chapters and the appendixes that are in the back?
Any way to show the link between the chapters and the appendices in the back of the book? Ooh. I sometimes in the front of the book they will have a list of appendices.
I didn't know if there was something that says go look at appendix or look at chapter.
Yeah, I don't know. There may be, as he's going through, there may be some places in the text where he'll say, "Hey, check out this appendix," but otherwise, it looks like the first three are basically aimed at how to gather data, which is the chapters that we've been covering here together. So I would just say, look at those appendices as you're able to and, map those on yourself. But they are very helpful things. The chapters that were due for this week, I really hope you guys were able to read those because they were incredibly helpful. When it comes to understanding how to actually engage with people for the purpose of discipleship. And the key thing that he was bringing out there was, here's how you ask good discipleship-oriented questions. And that was really challenging to me because, like you, I tend to just fall into the pattern of asking the same questions in the same relationships, and it just kind of over time becomes white noise. But really thinking intentionally about, okay, how do we do this? And what questions should we be asking? Those chapters were very helpful in kind of challenging my thinking to broaden out my questions and totally different kinds and categories of questions that if you apply those things to some of your relationships, like your marriage or your kids or your neighbors, as we're going to do here this morning, that's going to be very helpful to you. So I would very much encourage you to go back and read the chapters here for this week. Okay? I saw another hand somewhere here. I know I did. Yeah, John. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so my understanding of what he is saying there is that rather than identifying with the suffering of someone else and saying, I know exactly what you're going through, when the reality is you don't, because you're not in their situation or in their shoes. And even if you've gone through something similar, it's not the same. Your life, your personality, your background, your context, all those factors that influence the way a situation is perceived are going to be different, even if the actual issue itself is the same. So it's not really helpful to say, I understand, where you are right now. You don't. You can try, but you don't. Better is to find your point of commonality with someone who is suffering in the reality that Christ, the one who came and became incarnate for us, suffered extensively to the max on our behalf. In my suffering, I look to him. In your suffering, you look to him. Because he, as the incarnate sufferer, perfect one, understands where you are today. In a way, friend, that I just can't. As much as I may try, I can't. But you know what? I love you, and I know he loves you, and he is here for you. And so it's pointing their eyes towards reality of the incarnation, which allows now to have someone who truly does understand. That is my understanding of what the author was talking about. Does that help? Okay. Yeah.
Would it be safe to say, too, that he understands suffering because of what he went through, but he also, for what we do, understands our hearts.
Yes. Yeah.
He understands the context. He knows everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really helpful, Bruce. So he not only understands the nature of your trial and of your of your experience and of your suffering, but he also understands you, which is something that as a friend I could not say of you. I don't understand the nature of your suffering necessarily. Christ does. I also don't understand you and all the ins and outs and details of your heart and your relationship before God. Christ does. And so he understands you and your situation far better than I could ever hope to understand you. So better when it comes to engaging with someone who is struggling to point them towards an identification with Christ rather than an identification with me, right? That's commiseration, which, when it comes time to comfort somebody, commiseration doesn't really do much to really bring them true comfort. But pointing them to the reality of Christ and his incarnation, well, there's loads of comfort there. So, okay, good. Yeah.
So, Merriam-Webster says that a synonym of incarnate would be embodied or to make manifest or comprehensible.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we are ambassadors for Christ, if we incarnate, are we not to make ourselves Christ in that?
Yeah, so part of what the author is saying there is that, one of the ways that, you are able to point their eyes back towards Christ, the one who truly understands, is as it's not even as you say, hey, in the midst of your trial, get your eyes off yourself and look to Christ. Well, that's also not going to be entirely helpful. But the way by which you are able to get their eyes on Christ is as you embody the reality of Christ, which is your word. And I think that's also part of what the author is pointing at there, that our responsibility ultimately is to reorient these eyes, of this individual towards the person of Christ. And we do that as we embody the character of Christ in our own behavior, manifesting the fruit of the Spirit in a moment of suffering for someone. That's why we come alongside them and we seek to love them and care for them with patience and grace, kindness, compassion, and even joy as is appropriate. Because those are images of Christ. Those are, in a sense, incarnations of the incarnate one. That helps someone in a difficult spot see what they need to see without beating them over the head with a sermon, right? And that's kind of, I think, the end goal of where the author is going there. Show them an incarnation of the incarnation, right? An embodiment of the incarnation. Yeah. 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 Okay? Yeah, Emerson.
I was just thinking of reading with those three elements of us identifying with this person.
Right.
Trying to think of that in terms of this idea of incarnating.
Yeah.
Again, it's always, you do that, but you can do that clearly. It's just, people can discern.
Yes, yeah, and that is absolutely true. That we are called to grieve with those who grieve, and we're not, and weep with those who weep. By the way, and rejoice with those who rejoice. We're not saying that we don't do those things because hey, you shouldn't be doing those things. It's as you do those things, are you doing those things in a way that is ultimately going to be reflective of Christ to that person? Which is, I think, your point. You can do that in the flesh, which a fleshly way coming alongside someone is really taking their trial onto yourself, right? And commiserating with them. Oh, this is awful, and wow, it's so bad, and I can't believe that this has happened to you. And then stopping her, right? And then working yourself into an emotional frenzy because you can't believe this has happened to them. And now you feel the weightiness and the gravity and the grief and the pain of what they're experiencing. Well, you've only made yourself worse. You certainly haven't helped them, right? And if that's what you do, where you're coming alongside them in the power of your flesh. But if you come alongside them in the power of the Spirit, to truly embrace them in their moment of pain and seek to be reflective of Christ's Spirit, that's a very different story, right? And I think that's what the author's trying to get to there. All right? Yeah, Jay.
It seems like most of this book is written so far from the vantage point of somebody asking for help, or somebody wanting to be in that deeper relationship,
Yeah.
or at least open to that.
Right.
You just said that we should be disciples in kind of all relationships
Yeah.
and all types of discipling. And so, in your mind, what does that look like just on a Sunday morning here at NCC?
Okay.
With two people that maybe one of us is here and one of us isn't, and there really isn't an interest on the part of the other party to go past that surface level.
Yeah.
Do you force it? Do you just let it be? What would your desire be as a pastor?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say that you force it. I would say you come back the next week to the same person and try again, right? It's not that I'm going to make you talk about Jesus right now, because if you don't, well, I'm going to make you, and we're going to get there no matter what, because this is my sacred, sworn, solemn duty. No. It's that I am, in every interaction that I have, I am seeking to offer to you, whether that is implicitly through something that I say, explicitly through something that I say, or implicitly through the way that I say to you whatever it is that I'm saying to you, that your eyes would be turned to Christ because of either the content of what I've said or the manner with which I've said it. That there be an air of Christ about me, because the Spirit of Christ is within me, right? So it's not that as you come to church, let's say, and you're engaging with someone, that you have to quote a Bible verse and say something about Jesus specifically in order to have accomplished your mission. But the way that you engage with somebody, either in caring for them or in grieving with them or in kind of stopping and actually taking stock of them and loving them, the way that you do that, you are offering them an element of discipleship in that moment, right? So I would say if you engage with someone at the church here, where you walk up and you say, "Good morning, how are you? Was your walk blessed this week and strengthened in Christ?" And the answer is yes. That's it. And then they turn around and walk away. I'm not going to chase them down the hall and say, "Well, hey, wait, you got to tell me why." But the next week, I'm gonna look for that same person, and I'm gonna say, "You know what? They clearly did not want to talk about this last week, but I like to try that again and just see maybe they were having a bad week, and engage them." So I know last week you said you kind of seemed like maybe it was a little bit of a rough week. How are things for you this week? Any better? Where what I'm demonstrating in that moment is a genuine care, compassion, concern for the heart and life of that individual, not just, "Hey, we greeted each other and I fulfilled my social duty to you." Getting beyond the social duty to the genuine care and concern for someone. That is where interaction ends and discipleship really begins. Okay. Yeah, Bob. Yeah.
It's time consuming, and it's out of the love of Christ that you go ahead and you say, showing yourself, but the main thing comes down to for the person
Right.
It's got to be a trust relationship to know you're not going to beat them over the head with the Bible because of concern for them, and that comes, guys, with time. As we're getting here, the interrogatory questions, not yes, no questions.
Yeah.
To be asked, to be able for them to feel safe in revealing to you the innermost things in their life, up to a point that they don't want you to know anything else about their life.
Yeah.
I want to know, you'll never know everything about Bob Drew. You'll never know everything about Pastor Rick. Okay? But you got to go ahead and work with those things to go ahead and help them, encourage them to see introspectively to themselves and how they stand in relation to the Bible and what's going on in the different circumstances in their life. And that just takes lots of time.
Yeah. Bob, that's actually a great point. And to that point, I would just, to put that in perspective for the rest of you, maybe just give you kind of a rule of thumb that I've discovered in the various kind of pastoral ministries and transitions that I've made. I think it's very important for us to level set our expectations accordingly here. What we're talking about, is somebody really kind of opening up their life to you and saying, hey, I really need help in this area. That does usually take a lot of time before they're into that, unless the house is just so on fire and burning down that they're like, if I don't get help, I'm going to die, or my marriage is going to be over. And, then, that can kind of short circuit it a little bit if there's really a crisis. Well, they'll come to you sooner for help. But I would say that generally, rule of thumb, it takes about 2 years of engagement, investment, and relationship before people will really start to trust you with their day-to-day sorts of problems and needs. And that's been true, I would say, in pretty much every different ministry context that I've ever transitioned to. Now there are problems that people will bring up, and they're kind of surfacey problems, but I'm talking about really getting down to the heart level problems of how they think and why they do what they do, where they're willing to just bring those things to you kind of on their own. That was true for me out at Grace Church and in different ministries that I went into out there. That was certainly true for me here at New Community Church. Engagement with people individually, there's a period of them getting to know you and to trust you and learn who you are and how you think, where then they say, you know what, this is somebody that I really can trust and open up to. And so, if somebody does not just kind of open up and spill their guts to you in the first month of interaction where I've said hi to this person every week for 4 weeks in a row, why aren't they trusting me with their deepest thoughts and problems? Well, that is not the way it works, right? There's got to be intentional, intensive relational investment over a lengthy period of time before the average person is going to say, you know what, that man is someone that I can go talk to when I'm in trouble. And so got to be faithful over a long haul in order for this kind of ministry to really take off. And so what we're doing here in training ourselves in this as a church is not something that we're looking at the next 6 weeks of life in New Community Church, and it's going to change everything overnight. Guys, we're faithful to think this way in our interactions over time. And when I say time, I mean years. It will radically revolutionize the nature of life at New Community Church and our relationships within it as we're pointing each other towards Christ. So I think, Bob, that's a great point. Yeah. 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 That's a really, really important point. So that's good.
If you don't think it's a big deal, that's gossip.
Yeah.
It needs to stay with you.
Right.
Little things,
Yeah.
because then the big things,
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really great point as well. If somebody does open up to you and share their struggles and their difficulties with you, even if, Kurt, as you just said, you don't think it's a big deal, sharing that information with others without permission is a big deal. Now, I would say, as you begin to engage with people at this level and the problems in their life, it is important to set the expectation with them from the get-go. Hey, look, if we get to a point where the issues that we're talking about here are just so substantive and significant that we need the benefit of additional spiritual leadership to resolve these things, I just want to let you know that I'm not going to hesitate for your good and God's glory to go get that help from someone else, a counselor, an elder, a pastor. That is the function of spiritual leadership, right? And so as you're engaging in those sorts of things, a lot of times if it really is kind of an issue where you're like, hey, we're going to need to talk through this with somebody else, Set that expectation up front rather than, getting 6 months into a kind of a, counseling discipleship relationship and saying, uh-oh, I'm in over my skis and now I got to get some help. And the other person's like, no, you can't do that. Well, you should have warned them up front that that's something that could happen, needs to happen, if things get to that place. Okay. Because you do need the help of spiritual leadership and the benefit of spiritual maturity to help you know how to help others. Okay, and that's where I would even just say, going back to some of the material that Ernie Baker gave to us when he was here. I know a number of you men were in there. He kind of had that rubric to assess how serious and significant is the issue that I'm working with someone on here. And is this something that really I should be dealing with, or is this something that a spiritual leader should be dealing with, or the pastor should be dealing with, or even a trained counselor beyond the pastor who specializes in this area should be dealing with? And that was a very helpful rubric that I would like to see us here at Community Church using more, even as have counselors being trained up, to kind of have some help in discerning at what level do certain kinds of issues need to get kicked up the chain, and at what level can and should I be trying to really engage in the issue that's before me. So I would say go back and at that if you're wondering, like, how do I know? That was very helpful material. Okay? All right, wow, we just spent a lot of time. So let's go ahead and get going here this morning, which was all good questions. But we've been talking here, and I need to make some progress. All right. So just to hold this back out in front of you, and if you're wondering why do you keep coming back to this, it's because if you get nothing else out of this class, I want you to walk away being able to repeat this definition at the drop of a hat. What is discipleship? Discipleship is me using my knowledge of Christ to help others know Christ. In whatever form, fashion that takes, depending on the nature of the relationship, that is our objective, to both be a disciple and to then turn around and make disciples. That's what we've been talking about, and I'm hammering that because that is the main point that we're trying to get through here. So, in light of that, you say, okay, I get the picture, I get the goal, I see what we're trying to do here. What are some key principles that will help me get beneath the surface with individual people and in my interactions with them? Let me go ahead and give these principles to you, and then I want to spend some time maybe walking through some different kinds of relationships, giving you some ideas on how those things can and should apply to those relationships, okay? The first one is always be assessing, okay? Assessing yourself, assessing the other person, and thinking through where is this relationship and what does this person most need from me as it relates to their knowledge of Christ. To say it another way, how do I aim most effectively this discipleship relationship towards a destination of spiritual fruit? Okay? I think the biblical model for that is found in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 14. You guys can go ahead and turn there. And maybe somebody else go to 2 Timothy 2:2. Who could go ahead and skip ahead there just to save time? Alex, you can do that. Talking to the Thessalonian church, which, by the way, is a very good and healthy church. But he says, we urge you, brothers, to do the following. Admonish the idle. Your Bible may say the unruly or the undisciplined there. Admonish the undisciplined. Encourage the faint-hearted. Help the weak. Be patient with all. So you see 4 different actions or activities there aimed at 4 different kinds of people in 4 different kinds of places. And the idea there is that before you're engaging with them, or as you're engaging with them, you're trying to discern where are you at and what do you need in order to have your eyes aimed at Christ. If you are the unruly or the undisciplined or the idle, well, you need to be admonished. If you to not be that way. If you are faint-hearted, where your faith is just not in a good place, you need to be encouraged in your faith. If you're weak, meaning you're not strong in your daily Christian walk, well, you need to be helped. That's what you need. But with everybody, we're to be patient, regardless of the category that they're in. So do you see there how that in Paul's mind he's saying to these Thessalonian mature believers, hey, as you engage with one another, be assessing constantly the nature of where these relationships are at and what's needed in order for Christ to be most magnified in their life. Do you see that? Okay, there's an assessment process that's happening. Now, to that verse, I would just say, it's interesting. I've noticed a tendency, and this is a tendency that's true, especially among younger people at this church and at others, where you will go to them and there will be some level of admonishment, correction that the way you're thinking is not right, and I'm encouraging you with the Scripture to think differently. And sometimes the response to that can be, wait a minute, why are you coming crashing down on me and telling me what's what? Because I'm not the unruly here. I'm the faint-hearted. That's my problem. I'm the faint-hearted. And you're saying, no. You're not the faint-hearted. You're actually being unruly and undisciplined in the way that you're speaking and the way that you're living. This is not an issue of your faith being weak. This is an issue of your life being out of control. And so there is admonishment that's necessary. But a lot of times when you assess carefully that, no, this person needs the admonishment of having the correction of the Scriptures brought to bear in their life in a gracious and patient way, they will resist that and say, hey, don't admonish me because you're not supposed to admonish the weak. You're supposed to help the weak. And, that can be a problem at times. So a lot of times you'll do the assessment, but the person receiving the benefit of the assessment is not going to want what you have to offer because they've assessed themselves a little different way. And that's just a function of spiritual maturity in their life, where that just proves all the more that they do need the instruction of Scripture, because we should all be willing to receive admonishment when someone comes and tells us, hey, your life is not matching with what the Scriptures say here. Let's think differently. We ought to be willing to embrace that and be grateful for that. Because we all need that in our lives. But the point here, that's kind of aside, the point is that we are responsible to be assessing the relationship before we engage in it and what it needs. Okay, that's principle number one. Principle number two is that we're to exercise a spirit of diligence in the doing of this work. And the reason why I say that is that discipleship relationships, the kind of engagements and interactions that we're talking about, they don't just happen. Okay, they really do take work, where you have to work at seeking to point the eyes of others towards Christ. Doing what you do on purpose. And that's what 2 Timothy 2:2 tells us. Alex, I'm going to have you read that, but before you do, somebody else go ahead to Hebrews chapter 4. Who can go to Hebrews 4? Charlie? Okay. Alex, read for us 2 Timothy 2:2. Okay? Do you hear the word there, the verb? Let me ask you, what's the verb there in that verse, 2 Timothy 2:2? What's the action word? To entrust, right? And that's not a passive word. It doesn't mean that, I'm just walking up to you and dumping everything on you saying, now you've been entrusted, good luck, tap out, I'm done. No, to entrust something means that you are digging deep into it with somebody over the span of time and making an active and intentional investment. Right? There's work that is required there in this aspect of discipleship, where Paul is saying those things that you have received from me, entrust to others who will do the work to entrust them to other faithful men still, 4 generations. And there is work that is happening there between each of those generations for the truth to be rightly transferred from life to life to life. But that takes diligence, effort, and intentionality, which is the next principle, the next word that I want us to think about here this morning, where we're actively asking ourselves, what is my plan for this discipleship relationship? Okay, I have assessed where I'm at, where this person's at, and how we can best show Christ. I'm willing to do the work to engage with them. But then it's not just, hey, let's go hang out and do whatever we're going to do. No, there needs to be some intentionality behind how you're doing what you're doing. Okay, what's my plan? I know some people may say, well, I much prefer, organic kind of relationship, for whatever that means, as though we're fruits in a supermarket aisle. I understand what it means, that there's this kind of, just natural growth that happens in a relationship, and that's true, and that's good. I'm advocating for, guys, is not necessarily being calculated if I'm engaging with people, but it does mean that I'm trying to be purposeful in my time with those people. I'm not letting my time go to waste. I'm wanting to do what I do on purpose, and that's is getting at when he talks about these questions that he's working through. Those questions are not just questions that you just stumble into in a conversation. Those questions are ones that before you engage in a conversation with somebody, you're actively planning. But what information you need to gain from here? You're thinking ahead about it and charting out the course of the conversation in order to be intentional and purposeful with that engagement. And you say, well, what's the model for that? Well, Hebrews 4:14 through 16, Charlie. Okay, so this was a point that Tripp did make in his book that I thought was actually really helpful, that Christ was the ultimate data gatherer, right? That he was very intentional in the way that he engaged with the human race before he saved the human race, to the point where he was willing to come and become like us to really experientially understand the nature of our existence prior to his provision of the solution for our problem. Right, which is a great model for us to have as disciplers and counselors. Before we go swinging into, well, here's your solution. Well, do you actually understand the nature of where this problem or where this person's at and the problems that they're facing, or in the nature of their life? Have you actually stopped and slowed down enough to be intentional about asking the questions to gather the data before you bring solutions to bear? Which, guys, that principle applied to marriage alone is going to be helpful to you. Okay, I know you all know that. Okay, so intentionality. And then finally, the last one I would say is just humility, right? Do I remember that I've got my own need for growth even as I'm helping others grow? And am I willing to learn alongside someone in a transparent way? Or do I have a spirit of pride that is going to say, no, I'm not going to tip my hand, show my cards, or in any way betray the fact that, yes, I'm a sinner too in need of grace who is growing into Christ-likeness myself. See, as you come alongside someone, you're not trying to set yourself up as the paragon of virtue and emulation, where now, hey, you need to be just like I am because I'm so great. That's not the intention of discipleship. What does 1 Corinthians 11:1 say? In as far as I'm like Christ, you be like me. Right? The goal is Christ-likeness. And you can call people to say, hey, look, this is the way that I do it. Let me show you how I do it, if what you're doing is tied to the Spirit of Christ within you and into the mind of Christ within you, right? But the goal is always Christ-likeness, not Gregory-likeness, because that would be a scary thought. You see what I'm saying there, okay? There's a humility where you understand your place. You are a conduit, not the destination. And there's a humility that comes with that, where I'm willing to talk to somebody that I'm working with or interacting with about my struggles, even as I interact with them about their struggles. I'm not glorying in the reality of my own sin, but I'm willing to show, look, I'm going through the same process of growth as you are, and we're here to help each other become more like Christ. Are you willing to show that kind of vulnerability, transparency, and humility, that's the biblical word, that is necessary in order for them to understand that you are on this journey together? Which is what Galatians 6:1, I think, reminds us of. You brothers who are spiritual, who are seeking to restore someone who is sin, keep watch over your own soul, right? Don't assume that you are better than them just because you're one step further down the spiritual pathway than them. That doesn't make you better, or it just means that the Lord has done more work in your life to take you further along the way. But you're still in the path, just like they are. So think more highly of yourself than you ought to. Okay, so those are some principles, some foundational principles that I would say are absolutely critical to getting beneath the surface and accomplishing our goal of discipleship. So let's turn the corner now here just a little bit and talk about what these principles should look like in the context of different. Start with marriage, and if you guys have ideas on some of this, we can dialogue on that as well. But when it comes to marriage, how do you think about a marriage as being a disciple-making opportunity? That's a growth level opportunity, right? The Lord has given you a spouse, if He's given you a spouse, for the purpose of your sanctification, right? That's the point of marriage, is that we would encourage and help each other become more like Christ. In a sense, the relationship of a marriage functions kind of like, it's not just sandpaper, it's like a power belt sander, right? Where the Lord really uses the proximity of this relationship, closer than any other human relationship, where two lives are thrown into one, and now there's this powerful sanding effect that takes place as the Lord refines us in different ways, but He does that largely through the interaction that we have with each other. Well, what is that called? Where we're both together having the purpose of mutual sanctification. Discipleship, right? That's what we're talking about. Where my goal is that my wife would see Christ better because of who I am and my leadership of her. That's what Ephesians 5 commands me to be and to do, is to lead her in a way that Christ has loved, and to love her in a way that Christ has loved me. So my goal for my wife is that she would better know, love, see Christ because she's seeing Christ in me. And her goal for me is that I would better know, love, see Christ because I'm seeing Christ in her and in the way that she is fulfilling her role within our marriage. So there's this discipleship, mutual discipleship that is happening in the context of a marriage. Now, life happens, right? And that's the objective, but that doesn't mean that's the way it's going to be lived out every single day, because there are challenges, there are bumps in the road, there are difficulties that happen, there are kids that get inserted into the picture and disrupt this perfect image of marital harmony and discipleship. Well, those are all the things that as those difficulties are inserted into your life, they reveal your need for further sanctification. And so that's not outside of God's purpose, that is part of God's purpose. So, how do we engage in a disciple-making way in the context of a marriage relationship? Well, let's just walk through our principles here. There is a sense in which there needs to be a constant assessment that is happening as it relates to your responsibilities to your spouse. I'm constantly evaluating. How did that conversation go? How did that situation unfold? If there was a disagreement between us, the way that I engaged in that, was that the right way to engage? There's a regular pattern of communication that's happening as we're working through issues together and assessing together how situations unfolded in certain circumstances and how our relationship weathered those circumstances, where we're constantly thinking through that. You know, one of the ways that Michelle and I have found it helpful in this regard is to have, and this is going to sound really weird, but we have a weekly calendar meeting. And that the purpose of that is to sync up our life and to assess where we at. Because we found that if we don't do that, a month, 2 months will go by and we're all pulling our hair out trying to figure out, why do we feel like our hair's on fire right now? And the reason why is because we haven't been assessing the nature of our home life and the responsibilities that we've taken on and the things that are on our calendars. And so you find yourself just bumping into each other like, well, I'm going here and I'm going there. Well, you're not synced up because you're not assessing together the priorities for your life, for your marriage, for your family. You're not making decisions together. And so it's become very important for us to have kind of a weekly set-aside checkpoint where she's got her calendar, I've got mine, and we're looking at these are the things that are on our plates. Now let's make our decisions and plan of attack for the week accordingly. And most importantly, how are we specifically going to honor Christ in the way that we engage through all of the things on our plate this week as we relate to one another? And what do we need to build in order to make time in the midst of all this stuff to ensure that we've got time to talk to one another, engage with one another, and debrief on these things? It's going to be busy. Where are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? That's the kind of intentional assessment that I'm talking about here, where if you just ignore that, don't do it, and life just happens, well, you find yourself kind of spread thin all over the map. You say, well, that sounds like a lot of work. I didn't know marriage was supposed to take that much work. No, that's the point. Diligence, right? That's the second principle here. That you're being diligent to think ahead, to be intentional, to ask questions, to do what you do on purpose. Yeah, John. Communicate, first of all. So it's, hey, honey, this was the plan. Here is a circumstance that's come up. I want to make sure you know about that. And are there adjustments that we need to make to the plan in light of this new piece of information that's come up? But that's the reason why a regular checkpoint, is important, because 90% of the time you can foresee what's coming. It's pretty rare that something will just boom. This has now come up and it's going to impact your side of the equation. Sometimes that happens, but most of the time you can foresee these kinds of things coming up. They do come up, and you got to communicate through that. But you can save yourself an awful lot of headache and relational tension, where now you're discipling each other to be angry people if you're not communicating. But if you're actively communicating, how do we approach this together in a way that honors Christ? What are you doing there? You're discipling each other to live intentionally in a way that brings glory to Jesus, where we are doing what we do on purpose, to be intentional about it, to honor Him in the way that we even structure and use our time. Okay, and that's what I want to point us to. Yeah, Bruce.
Well, I was just kind of picking up on his, sometimes there's some ad hoc assessment, if you will, it happens in the moment. But
Yeah.
you haven't planned it.
Sure.
So it surprised me that you and Michelle are so good about coordinating calendars, but
Well, no, and I would tell you guys, in full transparency, which is point number 4, that doesn't happen every single week. But you know what? If a week goes by where that doesn't happen, you start to feel it. If 2 weeks go by where that doesn't happen, boy, it's on fire. And so we've learned you cannot skip that time, and if you do, you're going to pay for it. So for us, that's helped. And I'm not saying you got to go home and have a count, babe. Sit down. We're having a calendar meeting right now. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just trying to share with you that's the way that we've translated these principles into practice in our life. We found that regular assessment of where we at to be very helpful, because it's not the kind of thing you can just do once every 6 months and then just be okay. It's constant, ongoing assessment of life.
I'll give you an example, an ad hoc example of assessment. And I'm probably the only husband in here who does this, but when my wife starts talking about something that she's wrestling with or an issue or whatever, I'm immediately jumping in
Yeah.
to give her potential solutions or
Right.
answers, help her get past this, get whatever. And, the other day it happened, and I was catching myself, but she was also reminding me, let me just say this,
Yeah.
without that. And it happens frequently, and I have to keep trying to assess, am I doing this again
Yeah.
to her?
Yeah. I think that's a really, really helpful point. We're not, our role as a husband is not to be the problem solver in chief, right? The goal is not to solve the problem. The goal is that through the problems, Christ's likeness would be formed both in myself and in her, which requires that we get down to the level of the heart, not just my heart, but her heart too. And that's where, guys, these chapters on asking questions becomes so helpful. Bruce, like you, my tendency can be to just swing in and, well, here's what you need to do, and here's the problem. Problem solved, I got things to do, let's move along down the road. But nobody's gotten down to any heart issues going on in that circumstance at all. Not me, and certainly not her. And it's my job to help her get there. But I'm not going to do that by saying, now let's talk about your heart for a second. Right? She's not going to probably take that very well. Instead, what do? Let's ask a question. Right? Here's the problem. So what do you think led to problem X? Well, she's going to talk. And as she talks, it's from the mouth, it's from the heart that the mouth speaks. So the more she talks and the more you draw her out in her talking, the more her heart is going to be revealed. And the more her heart is going to be revealed, usually as she talks, she's going to realize, if she's a God-fearing biblical woman, hey, that the way that I'm thinking about probably isn't the best way, is it? No, it's not. But now she's drawn that conclusion, and you didn't have to go and, hit her, right in the face, metaphorically, with, boom, you need to think differently. And you certainly didn't, drop a bomb of a solution into her lap saying, well, this is what you need to do, let's move on. No, ask questions. Take the time to slow down. And that's part of what I mean by being intentional. Part of that intentionality, guys, is thinking ahead. Something that I will often do when I get down to the end of the responsibilities that I've got for a given day. I don't just come out of my office and just boom, walk right into my family. Take 5-10 minutes if you need to think, okay, where is my family at today, and what do they need from me in order to see Christ more effectively tonight, at dinner, and through bedtime? What questions can I be asking them to make good use of this time together? So that at dinner time, it's not just what you do, but there's some kind of active conversation that is sparked by a strategic question that I've asked. I'm not the kind of a guy who thinks of those questions just on the spot. More often than not, I've got to actively plan ahead. And I know that sounds like, wow, you got to plan ahead how to talk to your family. Yes, I got to plan ahead how to talk to my family. Because if I don't, I'm not going to be intentional, and therefore there will be no redemptive value to my interactions with my family. But if I'm going to be serious about discipling them, I need to think ahead and plan tonight at dinner. Here's a question that I intend to ask. Now, to the point of flexibility, there may be things coming up at dinner that preclude me being able to ask that question. And I got to be flexible enough to not be so married to my plan and so proud about my thoughts that, hey, stop whatever you're doing and listen to me. Well, that's not showing Christ either, okay? So take that with some balance, all right? Let's be careful with that. But do what you do. Move where you move in your spiritual leadership on purpose. Be intentional with that. And then be humble with it, right? Your efforts to really do the work of disciple making with your spouse, you're not going to be perfect at that. And you need to be able to ask your wife for her forgiveness and for her opinion and to respect her thoughts and to gather her perspective before you just come, laying out your own. That evidences a spirit of humility that is also reflective of Christ. Okay, so those are just some very practical ways that you can do the work of disciple making in the context of your marriage. Let's do another one here. Let's talk about parenting, perhaps, for just a couple minutes. I know we've only got a couple minutes left. We're not going to get through all these, but I just want to show you how you can apply these principles practically to life. This whole idea of assessment, right? As a parent, it's easier for me to look at my kids and just think of them as being perpetually 5, right? Where they just do what I tell them to do because I tell them to do it. I mean, that was kind of like the golden age where I got them trained good enough that they're not, making messes out of everything, but they're still fully dependent upon my authority and they do whatever I tell them to do in the moment or there's consequences, right? And so I've got the tendency to just think that's the way that I engage as a parent, as though my kid was 5. But the reality is my kids aren't all 5. I don't have any kids that are 5 right now. Right? I've got a 12-year-old who is starting to go into this whole world of having to make her own decisions. And I can't just, be slinging orders at her expecting that I can engage with her in the same way that I did when she was 5. Do what I say. Why? Because I said so. Now, there's some engagement there where she needs to start understanding why I'm saying what I'm saying. And I need to be assessing the nature of my relationship with my 12-year-old, saying, what kind of engagement does she need in order to truly understand how to live in a way that honors Christ? That is very different engagement from what my 3-year-old needs right now, right? I mean, let me just tell you, he needs intensive engagement, right? And it's a very different kind of engagement. But sometimes I'll find myself treating my 12-year-old as though she were the 3-year-old because I'm in the 3-year-old mindset. And sometimes I'll find myself treating my 3-year-old as though I'm treating the 12-year-old, where it's just, hey, you're going to make the bad decision. You're going to suffer the well, he doesn't know, So you got to assess on a regular basis, where is the child? Where is their heart? What do they need? And how can I seek to leverage what I know of Christ to help them see him at the level of development that they currently are? That takes constant assessment in life, and that's a conversation that Michelle and I constantly have. Don't just do that on your own either, by the way. Bring your wife into that process where you are seeking to make disciples together. That's not an individual solo sport. That's a team sport. You and your wife, if God has blessed you in that way, together, seeking to assess where is this child and what do they most need right now. Be diligent in that. You've got to apply yourself to that work every day. It's not the kind of a thing where you can just engage one day and then let it coast for the rest of the week. You've got to be diligent where your perspective is every day, all the time, thinking, my goal is to point them towards Christ in every circumstance as I go through life. Be intentional with them. Do what you do on purpose. So when it comes time to talk about things like family devotions, are you doing them? What are you doing for them? Are they age appropriate? Before you get to dinner, have you thought about that? Or whatever time of the day you're going to do that, whether that's bedtime, before you get to bedtime. My kids love to talk at bedtime. That's when all the stuff comes out, is pretty much when they're to go to bed, which may be a stalling tactic, but you know what? I don't care, because that's my time to talk with them. So have I thought ahead about how to engage them and be intentional in that? This is something that I will confess to you guys that I think Michelle is probably better at than I am in terms of thinking ahead about how to engage with our kids. Once a year, she will take each of our girls away on an overnight trip. And for months in advance, she will actively think, now what are the life stages that they're going into, the situations that they'll be facing in these life stages, the new temptation we're going to be hitting them during this life stage, and how do I winsomely seek to address those things in an intensive way with my kids. So last weekend, she took Lizzie away on an overnight, and they spent, 3 hours in the afternoon before they went to the hotel that night down at the pottery studio painting pottery. Well, she's not just hammering her for sit down at the coffee shop and let me tell you what. Here's the facts of life. No, there's an activity there. They're enjoying it. And, in snippets, in 2-minute chunks, she's weaving in these kind of strategic thoughts for what Lizzie's going to need to know in this next year of life as she goes through certain transitions in her little childhood. But the point I'm trying to make is that she's doing that on purpose to be intentional, not just reactive to life. And my day's coming where I'm going to have to do the same thing with Will when he gets a little older. But that's a way by which you can be intentional. Okay? Again, be humble in your parenting relationships, right? When you mess up, which you will, let your kids see you repenting. If you sin in front of your kids, repent in front of your kids. If you get into a disagreement, a spat, an argument with your wife in front of your kids, get out of the argument in front of your kids. That way they can see, yeah, of course my parents have challenges and disagreements. Everybody does. To pretend that they don't would be hypocrisy. Most people do, because we're two fallen human beings living in the same space. The point is not my parents never got into a disagreement. The more important point is to see, how did my parents honor Christ in getting out of their disagreement, right? And that's a willingness to show a spirit of humility, where I'm not so proud as to give my kids the impression that I'm perfect, and whatever I say is the perfect way to do it. No, there's a spirit of humility there, which then sparks conversation. Did you see the way that we were working, Mom and I were working through that issue? Let's talk about why the issue happened. That was primarily because of my sin, 99 times out of 100. You know how that goes. But did you see the way that the gospel was applied to that? Where now there's an active discipleship conversation where they see there's disagreements, but here's how you handle those disagreements in a way that honors Christ. That's intentional disciple making, but it requires a spirit of humility to let them see that. Okay? There's a lot more that can be said on all these things. I know it is 7:30, so we've got to wrap it up here. But what I'm wanting to see is that these biblical principles for how to get down beneath the surface can and should be applied to every different kind of relationship that you've got. And I would just encourage you guys in your relationships, whether that be in your marriage, in your parenting, in your workplace, with your neighbors, your evangelism, to think intentionally, okay, how do I take these 4 principles and apply them to this relationship so that Christ could be honored and discipleship could be advanced in the nature of that relationship? Okay? I hope that some of that's helpful to help you see practically how this fleshes out. All right? And we will see you next time with Pastor Jerry. Right? Okay, thanks, guys. Good to see you.